Linux Luddites, episode 85, for the 22nd of August, 2016. Hello, and welcome to Linux Luddites, the show where we try all the latest free and open source software and then decide that we like the odd stuff better. I'm Joe.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Paddy. And after the news, this show will be hearing Joe's first impressions of a Ubuntu-based OS that seems to run pretty well on Chromebooks, and dipping into your feedback, and bringing you our take on a new desktop environment that just hit the big 1.0 release milestone. But before we get into all of that, what have you guys been up to since I last saw you actually at Talk Live?
Well, apart from editing and putting out all those shows and sending the audio to the various other people, I have been finally updating my CyanogenMod installations on my Nexus 9 and my OnePlus One.
Now, we talked about these guys quite a few times recently because it looked very much as if nothing was happening and we were a little bit concerned.
Yeah, but finally we've got some new snapshots for almost all the devices. There wasn't one for the Nexus 4, which is my wife's phone, but that was the last one to come out last time. There was a snapshot, and I haven't actually looked in the last day or so. I've been pretty busy. But generally speaking, it looks like CyanogenMod isn't dead, at least for now, which is very good news to me. Although I have also been checking out Dirty Unicorns, as suggested by one of the listeners, and I'm fairly impressed with that. It seems to have very good defaults. So if this CyanogenMod update, snapshot hadn't come out, then I think I may have moved to it by now. But for now, I'm sticking with CyanogenMod, I think.
And this is based on Marshmallow, is it?
Yeah. I mean, it's not. It's just an incremental. There's nothing majorly new about it. There's a few kind of new features. Including, when you're doing the optimizing apps thing, it actually tells you which one it's optimizing, and it looks a lot nicer than the standard Google, the sort of stock Android way of doing it. But otherwise, it's just security updates, really, because I hadn't had an update since April. And so now I'm, whatever it is, August the 5th patch level, which is much more reassuring than being stuck on April's one.
So you're going to be back in the very select crowd of CyanogenMod users.
I don't know what you mean, Paddy. Surely there's millions of people using it all over the world.
Yeah, it's how many millions the question, isn't it?
Yeah, they haven't quite got the 20 or 50 million users that they had claimed at one point, have they? It's looking more like sort of 3 or 4. But, 3 or 4 million is still not bad. You might not be able to monetize that as much as 50 million, but if 3 million people downloaded this show, I'd be pretty happy, I think.
Yeah, for sure. But this is the CyanogenMod, is it? Rather than Cyanogen Inc. and what it is they put out?
CyanogenOS. I'm not sure. I mean, they're not very transparent about these numbers, and I can't imagine there's that many CyanogenOS users because there haven't been that many phones available. There's been the OnePlus One and then some other minority phones, but even towards the end of the OnePlus One's life, that was running OxygenOS. So I wouldn't be surprised if the 3 or 4 million is CyanogenMod and CyanogenOS combined.
Yeah, like I say, not very transparent, and must be quite difficult to work out how many people have installed CyanogenMod. But, we'll see. Hopefully they won't go away because, like I say, you run it, I run it on a number of devices here. So it'd be nice for it to continue from that point of view at least.
Yeah, hopefully. So shall we get on with the news then?
Yeah, let's do it.
So first up then, software should be free, the FSF's first annual report. And the Free Software Foundation seems to be doing all right, doesn't it? If you go by what this report says, it kind of summarizes all of the good things they've been doing, tells you about their mission and who they've been helping and talking about what Stallman's been doing. And then the financial information makes for, an interesting scan because it's basically all black ink and not very much red ink. So things seem to be looking all right for them.
It does. I was interested in this because it's been, 30 years now they've been going, and this is the first annual report they've actually put out.
Yeah, it's a bit like Talk Live. I talk about that being an annual event, but when you've only done one, it's not really annual, is it?
No, I think they've done quite a good job with this as well. I mean, it does look a little bit more like a sort of local church newsletter than a professional, slickly produced report you'd expect these days. But I think it's good they're getting information out there, and they should be congratulated for doing so.
Does it make any reference as to why it's taken them this long to produce one of these? I would sort of have thought that they'd be a bit more transparent over their 30 years rather than waiting all this time. Or has it generally just come out of the blue?
Maybe they finally worked out how to make a PDF with free software.
Oh, no, let's be nice. I think communication is vitally important in this space, and it's something they haven't been very good at in the past. I mean, they generally rely on RMS to go out and preach the gospel, and that's exactly what he does do, which turns some people off. So having some different names and faces in front of folks and a slightly different approach perhaps to marketing, and it is marketing what they're doing here, and they need to do that if they want to get the message out. I think that's no bad thing at all from their point of view.
Well, sidestepping from the FSF to software conservancy, and there was a case between Christopher Hellwig and VMware, where he was claiming that some of the code within VMware's products has been taken from his code that's on GitHub. And it actually got thrown out by the German court, based upon, Chris is arguing that it's been thrown out because of sort of technical issues in the way that he delivered his evidence, and that he's going to appeal and try and bring the case once again. And the sort of evidence, from what I gather from reading some of these various posts, is that he has not delivered the evidence in a clear, this is what's been copied and here it is, absolutely clear what's been copied over. It's sort of my code's on GitHub, go and look at it, and here's the code from VMware, go and look at it. And I think the German court is a bit like, well, that's your job to show us the evidence, not our job to dig through it. So maybe he's got some rethinking to do in the way that he, in the way that he comes to court.
Yeah, and there's some question about the actual amount of code involved as well, isn't there?
Yes, it's not as much as maybe he had initially made it out to be, or it's not as much that you would consider taking the whole company to court over. And so it does seem that he's on, it's a less firm footing for his appeal. We'll have to wait and see whether the appeal does work and it gets back to court and it gets heard for the full case that it is.
But what, is it 119 lines or something? That's still, okay, it's not much in the grand scheme of things, but if that 119 lines have been copied, then surely he has a case.
I would say so, if they have been copied, just as I think Oracle had a case against Google.
It sounds like you don't think he's got much chance there.
No, I don't know. I mean, clearly he didn't present his evidence appropriately, and that is what, as Jesse's explained, that's why this got thrown out, which is obviously poor on his part and also on the part of Software Freedom Conservancy, who was supposed to be advising him on this. You'd have expected them to have a little bit more wherewithal, having had some experience in these matters. But yeah, I mean, face value, he does have a case, as Oracle did against Google, and I still cannot believe that ruling went against them. Much as I dislike Oracle, it's a case they should have won, and I can see them winning on appeal.
Well, I guess we have to wait and see to steal a phrase from a now ex-podcast.
Yeah, well, let's move it on then, but stick with the Germans and talk about Werner Koch, who has announced that a bug's been found in the mixing functions of libgcrypt's random number generator. And this apparently affects anything that uses that library and also GNU Privacy Guard. Now, apparently, this doesn't impact keys already generated, and the issue simply means that if you can gain access to some of the output from the random number generator, you can trivially predict subsequent output. And the flaw's already been patched, but what particularly interested me here, and why I'm actually including this story in the news, is the flaw's been in the code base since way back from 1998.
So that's a seriously long time, and from my limited knowledge about encryption and all these sorts of things, the random number generating is an absolutely vital, fundamental part. That's the bit that I would have thought would have been looked at and made. They make sure that is properly random. Like you get this entropy when you start up your computer, and there's even ways of moving the mouse and doing bits and bobs to increase the amount of entropy. You'd have kind of thought this would be looked at very carefully before relying on it.
You would, and it sort of brought to my mind the question of all these initiatives to have audits of source code and such like, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. But the other thing that occurred to me was this may be old code, but we found the bug. And had it been rewritten, as is the trend these days, just to rip things up and rewrite every 5 minutes or every 5 years, if you like, you're never going to get to the stage where these sort of devilishly difficult little bugs are ever found. So you're always going to be living with buggy code bases. And just from my point of view, anyway, it's nice the bug's been found. It may have been kicking around for, 18 years now, which isn't awfully clever. But had it been a newer code base, we'd probably never have found out about it, and we'd have had more vulnerable software than we have got now.
Yeah, well, constant innovation and not enough maintenance is a perpetual problem, isn't it? And speaking of which, BtreeFS has been found to have I suppose it's fair to say, serious problem in terms of RAID 5 and 6. And it's so bad that it's basically going to have to be rewritten, that bit of the code. And if you're using RAID 5 or 6 with BtreeFS, or ButterFS as some people call it, then you pretty much should not be doing that at this stage.
Yeah, and you say it's been found to have this problem, but the devs are sort of holding their hands up and saying, we knew it had this problem all along and you shouldn't have been using it.
So why not just remove that feature then if it's not working? Just make it so that it doesn't support RAID 5 and 6.
Well, RAID 5 and 6 is vital if you're going to get into like big industries and server racks and all this kind of stuff, isn't it? So I guess for BtreeFS to be a viable platform for big deployments, you've got to have RAID 5 and 6. And if it's not working properly, I feel sorry for someone who's used this and released it to a massive set of servers or something, and now having to work out how you change your file system. That's a real kick in the balls.
I know we've been very skeptical of BtreeFS on this show, particularly you, Paddy, because it's too new and not tested enough. And this is very much proof of that, isn't it?
It is. And like you say, I just don't understand, if they knew there were issues there, and they did, why it was compiled in by default, why it wasn't a feature flag or something, where it's just not actually going into the code base unless you specifically want that feature enabled. It's just lunacy.
And with ZFS now being available in Ubuntu and in Debian, they've made it fairly easy to add that in afterwards. This surely spells bad news for BtreeFS, because the majority, a lot of servers out there run in Ubuntu, and people have been using BtreeFS, whereas now they've got the option of ZFS. So it seems more likely that people will just sort of turn their back on Btree and go to ZFS now. Or is that opening up a can of worms to mention that?
Yeah, we'll put a lid on that can of worms. That's a discussion for another day. And we'll also be coming back to some FreeBSD or BSD type stuff later in the show. But so moving on to the next one, and it does sort of echo Paddy's item about the security problems in GPG. And this is a company called OSTIF, the Open Source Technology Improvement Fund, which is a bit of a painful title, are trying to gain funding through donations on Kickstarter and also lump sums from companies like DuckDuckGo to do audits of open source software that they would like to audit, but for reasons that it's important for security, for online privacy, and they've got this list of programs. And the first one that they've been able to raise the required amount of funding for is to look at VeraCrypt. Now, VeraCrypt is a fork of TrueCrypt when TrueCrypt went under a couple of years ago, and they're using a company called Quarks Lab, who's an independent adjudicator who's going to do this audit, and it started, so it should take a month or so. So we'll be able to follow up and see if any sort of vulnerabilities come out of that. Now, Quarks Lab, will be telling the guys over at VeraCrypt what the bugs are secretly, privately out and through the back door, so that they can get them fixed and, improvements released before they become public. And then in theory, you can, stand by VeraCrypt and say it's been audited, and these are the improvements that have been made, and there won't be so much questions over its validity as a way of encrypting files and folders and things.
But 30 days seems like an awfully short amount of time to audit the code. But that's because TrueCrypt was audited before, and so it's only been a relatively short period of time after this fork, and so it's only the new features of VeriCrypt that are going to be audited. So they're starting small, which seems like quite a sensible idea, but they've got quite grand plans for the future.
Yeah, they're starting very small. I mean, Jesse mentioned some of the funding there from people like DuckDuckGo. And in a way, although I'm pleased to see this sort of initiative, I was a bit surprised because when they tried floating the idea on Kickstarter earlier in the year, I mean, it was back in January, their first fundraiser closed, and they only managed to raise just over $2,000. At the time, I assumed it was a credibility issue, so how they've managed to improve that credibility in the interim, I don't know.
But isn't this the sort of thing the Core Infrastructure Initiative should be doing? Why do we need this OSDIF organisation?
I get the impression that this is someone with an idea and a goal, and he's got off his backside to do it and has got some people around him who can help him. And maybe it's just a case of odd timing that, he started doing this and this other initiative has started up at about the same time. Maybe it could well be a good thing that you've got two groups of people looking at the code and you can get through more code more quickly.
I suppose so, but it does reek of delusions of grandeur, doesn't it? If you look at some of the posts, or particularly one post about emails going missing and how they come across a little bit paranoid that obviously the governments and people are trying to snoop on us, but then it turns out that, oh no, they just had their settings a little bit wrong in Thunderbird or whatever.
It is complicated, Thunderbird, and we'll get back to that later in the show as well. Meanwhile, let's stick on the security side of things and talk about a problem that's been in all kernels since back end of 2012 that apparently allows for the tracking and hijacking of users' unencrypted traffic online, and the ability also to forcibly terminate sessions between a client and a host. And why this appears to be a nasty attack vector, to me at least, is you don't actually need to be a man in the middle. Providing you've got some visibility on what a client's attempting to converse with, you can actually disrupt that conversation.
Yeah, and you only need either the client or server to be vulnerable to this.
Yeah, and I don't think any of us are going to try and explain the issue here because it is a little bit nuanced. The links in the show notes do it quite well that I'm going to stick in. Basically, it's down to a weakness in how TCP sequence number windowing is implemented. And it also only affects Linux as far as I can tell, because Windows and OS X haven't actually implemented the RFC that specified the changes that caused the problem. And those changes, ironically, were designed as a defense against other types of attack.
So it's a feature introducing a bug, essentially.
Yeah, it's not all changes progress, I think, but it was with the best possible intentions. And of course, Android uses the Linux kernel, and the vast majority, and I've seen numbers of up to 80% people have floated, of Android devices out there are also vulnerable to this attack.
Yet one more reason to try and go for the latest patch level that you can. But I mean, the question here is this as serious as it sounds? And to me, I'm not convinced that it is, because it's not the kind of thing that is you can just cast a wide net. This is for attacking a specific individual, isn't it? So if you are, say, a government agency who's after one particular person, then this is a godsend to you because it makes it very easy to attack that one person. But just as a kind of scattergun, like phishing scams and that kind of stuff, it's not on that level, is it?
No, you need to know what the client is, IP-wise, and also what the host is they're trying to connect to. So you're quite right. Yeah, it wouldn't be good for just casting your net, but focused attacks, yeah, fantastic.
Well, as I said, it's very important that you get your security patches. And if you can't get them with Android, which, let's face it, is almost always the case, then maybe you should look at an alternative operating system like Ubuntu Touch, which does get updates all the time. And we've talked about the lack of apps on Ubuntu Touch before, and that is seemingly its Achilles heel. Whereas now Canonical have made it a little bit easier to get native apps running. If you've got an iOS or Android app that uses React Native, which is well, as the name suggests, native JavaScript, then to port that to Ubuntu Touch has just been made very, very easy. And so potentially we might be seeing more apps available for Ubuntu Touch. And that's got to be a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, given that it's been our sort of big grumble about switching over to not just Ubuntu, but any alternative phone OS, is the fact that you're used to having all of the apps that you've already got installed. And while the key ones may well be there, there's going to be a phone app and a maps app and a communication app and things like this. It's when you get down to the nitty gritty of the one that you use to sniff your network, or the one that you use to, control, in my case, my Tado and things like this. So it's actually be very useful to see how easy it is to get these apps across and how many of them make it across.
Yeah, I mean, the examples you said there, I don't think they're going to be coming across using this. I mean, this is basically native web apps, isn't it? I mean, it's all JavaScript-y, HTML stuff. So it's more things like, what's that transport one that you use, Jesse?
The Mighty City Mapper.
Yeah, the City Mapper, which I don't really care for. But yeah, that kind of thing, which is basically a front end talking to a server somewhere. I think it's that kind of thing that's more likely to be ported across using this. But there are a lot of those, so you need to start somewhere. And I think that it is definitely good news for Ubuntu Touch and convergence and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I do as well. And in fairness, they already did support Cordova, which used to be known as PhoneGap for those of us who are a little older, which allowed a lot of apps from other platforms to be ported over relatively easily as well. So they're obviously making a real push in this area. I mean, something we talked about at FOSS Talk Live actually was whether there should be Android support on Ubuntu Touch, and quite clearly the answer was no from people from Canonical and also largely from the audience, but there were some dissenters.
Well, I'm split on it. I mean, it does mean that people will come to your platform more easily, but then there's the API problems and you're just beholden to someone else at that point, whereas if you've got genuinely native apps, then you've got a lot more control over the whole thing, and you've got more chance of things working well and not just randomly breaking. So I can see the arguments, but they need to do more of this stuff basically to make it easier for developers. Because say what you like about Obama, I always come back to it. His developers thing is so true. Without the developers, your platform could be amazing, but it's not going to succeed.
I'm worried actually, because if your phone ends up being Ubuntu Touch and all you do is run Android apps, regardless of they're just sort of covers for the web app or whatever, but you just go, right, there's my app. It entirely sidesteps the whole sort of fundamental view of what Canonical are going for with the Ubuntu Touch, which is to have scopes and to have one code base which can run both on the phone and on a PC. And so when you plug in that phone to the PC, all of the sort of Ubuntu Canonical native apps, the terminal, maybe GIMP, if there's such a thing as a GIMP version on the phone. It's a stupid example, but these sorts of apps that run on your phone will then converge and run as full-size PC apps when you plug it into a TV and a keyboard. And that's kind of, one of the really big selling points of Ubuntu Touch. Yet, if actually people mostly use just very isolated apps from Android, from Google or what have you, they won't get the most out of the phone and what the vision that the Canonical have for it is. So, I'd be wary, a warning to Canonical that it may well get more people onto your platform, but actually they might end up losing what the goal is, what differentiates Ubuntu Touch from iOS and Android, I think.
Well, yeah, which is why you need to do things like we're talking about here, and that is get people to actually port native apps over properly, and so that they will work on the phone and converged onto the desktop.
Yeah, if they can get that working, more power to them.
Well, another thing Canonical's been up to is becoming a patron of KDE, which seems a bit strange given how they distanced themselves from Kubuntu and had all that tension, but now they're actually, teaming up with them and talking about how KDE is a very important desktop and Kubuntu is very important to the whole Ubuntu family and everything. And it makes me think that they just didn't like Jonathan Riddle, did they? That's just the bottom line here. They managed to get rid of him, and now they're cozying back up to KDE and Kubuntu.
Yeah, I found this a little strange as well, to be honest, bearing in mind the history. It's very welcome, of course, and well done to Canonical for doing so. The only thing that really sort of jumped out at me about this is that KDE obviously makes heavy use of Qt and is involved in the development thereof in some regards. And Qt's becoming increasingly important in Canonical's world.
So it might be a bit of a roundabout way of understanding how Qt interacts with KDE and therefore, well, maybe get some influence in that area as well. Well, as we've touched on Qt, I'm gonna steal the mic and drag us that way. And this is actually an announcement that there's a new Qt project called Qt Lite. I will be saying Qt because that's the way I read it. And basically, they're aware of the fact that the Internet of Things is coming along, and you might be wanting to run applications on a full-blown desktop, in which case you can have full-blown Qt, or on watches or IoT things without screens, with screens, smart TVs. And so the range of devices and the power, as in computing power that device has, is going to be very, very varied. And they're aware that a lot of the smaller devices get, the less power they have to run Qt. And so this Qt Lite, they've sort of stripped Qt down to sort of a backbone and increased the modularity of it. So you can have lots of discrete modules rather than have the whole Qt stack and then remove the bits you don't want. So it's easier to build up from a very empty base than it is to take down from a very full Qt stack. So it's just going to be a sort of a less monolithic version of Qt, and clearly a nod towards IoT devices.
Yeah, and funnily enough, there's been a lot of IoT stories in the news recently, but mainly they've been security ones, which sort of not good news ones generally. First up, we heard that almost every Volkswagen sold since 1995 can be unlocked using a software-defined radio, and little more than an Arduino with a radio receiver, and you can sort of cobble the kit together yourself for about $40. And this specific attack works because VWs share a small number of master keys, and combined with vehicle-specific keys, that actually permits access to the vehicle. And we've also seen some stories about how trivial it is to crack many of the Bluetooth low-energy locks out there. And I think possibly crack is a bit of a strong word for this, since a fair few of them seem to transmit passwords and other information without any encryption whatsoever. And just to wrap up this very short segment of Tales of Woe, a report about a smart electrical socket showed up and just really demonstrated how wrong things can be implemented. And these sockets that, according to the sales pitch anyway, would be ideal for hooking medical equipment up to. So, I guess getting away from the specifics, any thoughts from you two on the bigger picture here?
Well, iOS and not the operating system for Apple hardware is all I can think of. I'm thinking of the Twitter handle. Just putting a chip in things, connecting them to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth just for the sake of it. We're starting to see the real consequences of that. Because why do you need your electrical sockets to have network access? It's just ridiculous. And again, things like smart locks. What's wrong with a key? I'd hate to sound like a Luddite, cha-ching, but seriously, these things are not going to be around, or the companies that make them are not going to be around long enough to properly support them. And so if you're buying into this stuff that's running proprietary software, closed standards, how do people expect anything else to happen other than security problems?
That seems fair enough to me. So, Jesse, justify yourself.
Yeah, you've got all Tado or whatever in your house.
Yeah, that's a difficult one to justify, isn't it? Because I thought when Paddy went through these, I thought we're going to have to just ban all Internet of Things security news articles because there's going to be so many. Like you said, Joe, these plug sockets, they haven't spent all of their money on making sure that the Wi-Fi security and the login and the encryption is the best it could possibly be. They've spent all their money on making a nice little box that looks nice on the wall and does XYZ. Oh, and then we need some encryption on it or not, as the case may be. And it's just going to get more and more prolific as harebrained ideas get turned into reality, and you can force network access into whatever you like. I was just going to do a quick look as to whether or not Chubb have brought out a wireless or Bluetooth lock, because I think that's sort of will show where we are with these things. All these companies that we're talking about, as you again touched on, Joe, are, I don't want to say fly by night, but they're certainly not ones that have some sort of solid background and integrity to them. And I can't predict the future. They may well be here in 40 years' time, but at the moment, they might just, like you say, be here for a week, sell 100 of them, and buy a yacht and be done with it. And so it is a very worrying position. I certainly wouldn't put a smart lock as the only way of stopping people from getting into my home. And basically you're relying on stupid burglars. And that isn't a good way, that's not a thing that I would rely on to stop people getting into my house.
Well, the locks thing, I'm not so much worried about people getting in. It's more about getting locked out and the system just breaking to the point where you're just locked out of your house.
Yeah, because you can hardly have it fail open, can you?
Well, yeah. So it just seems like a bad idea to me. Although I do often, not often, but I have been known to get to my door and then try and open it with my car remote control, and it doesn't open. I'm, right, yeah, hang on, I need to put the key in. And it makes me think, why don't we live in a world where I can do the same thing? And, well, I suppose this is the answer. It's one thing for your car. Well, I mean, but again, the Volkswagen story has proven there that that's not particularly secure either. So maybe it's best that we just stick with Chubb locks and stuff for now.
They got microchips underneath your skin, don't you?
Yeah, you just wave your hand over payment devices and your home lock and all this sort of stuff.
That is literally going to happen very soon. But speaking of IoT then, and a slightly more positive, I think, story, and that is the Omega 2, which is a $5 Linux computer with Wi-Fi. And it's, well, described in their Kickstarter video as a very small, well, on their Kickstarter campaign, the world's smallest Linux server. And it is incredibly small. It makes the Raspberry Pi Zero look big. And it's got onboard storage. So it potentially looks quite good if you're into that kind of thing. But I'm not really, is the bottom line, so I won't be buying this. And one bit of a red flag, in the Kickstarter video, he does a uname-r, and it's a 3-point-something kernel, which in of itself isn't necessarily bad. I didn't look to see what kernel it is and whether it's an LTS or whatever, but we're well into the 4 series now. It makes me wonder how good the support's going to be for this, even from day one. But that said, it is doing incredibly well. They only wanted $15,000 and they've got over $500,000 with only 3 days to go. So it's happening. They're getting their money, and let's hope people actually get their little Omega 2s, eh?
Yeah, they're not as small as you make them out to be, because that's just the brains of the box, isn't it? Whereas actually, as soon as you see it connected to power, USB, these sort of useful things that mean that you can actually use the device, you have to attach it to another board. And then if you wanted GPIOs and things, there's an even bigger board. So the brains is very small, but brains is nothing without being able to connect to it and control it and even power the thing. So yeah, okay, if it was embedded in something, you would have the power going through the pins and what have you. But I think for most people who are hacking around and want these for little projects, it's not actually as small as it sort of looks on first glance.
And I suppose, to be fair, they have done the Omega 1. Well, I suppose it wasn't called the 1. And again, they wanted $15,000 and they got over $250,000. And so they've got a proven track record here. So I suppose if you're into this kind of thing, if you're into the maker side of things, then this is a must-have. Because, I mean, at $5, it's almost throwaway money, isn't it? You may as well buy a few of them. It's just to justify the postage.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually hadn't realised how cheap they were. Okay, fair enough. But I mean, on the sort of hacking side of things, this next news story is about Motorola, and I don't know if everyone is up to speed with Motorola, but their new phones have come out with these things called Moto Mods, and it's where you can sort of snap in improved battery or maybe a bigger camera. I'm not quite sure how they're working with Motorola, but different companies are doing different things. And one of these mods is actually for you to be able to hack it with an add-on board that Motorola and Farnell Element 14 have developed. And it's going to allow you to have GPIOs and video out and all sorts of USBs and inputs and outputs for various different controllers. And it's got its own SDK. And so it sort of is a little bit like using your phone's brains, but having all these peripheral extensions that you can have coming off your phone. So that's sort of a bizarre sort of hardware hack in the middle of Android and Raspberry Pis.
Well, it's not that bizarre, given that all a Raspberry Pi is an ARM board that is not a million miles away from what's inside your phone anyway. And so to give you these sort of add-ons to give you Raspberry Pi hack compatibility, it just seems fairly logical and certainly quite doable. I question how popular this is going to be, because you've got very well-established platforms like the Raspberry Pi out there, and things like we just talked about there with the Omega 2. So it makes me wonder how many people are going to want to use their phones in projects like this. But I suppose there'll be a niche market for it. But yeah, I can't see it being a massive winner.
Yeah, given that when I'm doing hacking projects, my phone doesn't leave my hand because I'm constantly trying to look up this picture or that bit of code or that something else, I don't want my phone suddenly being the brains and me having to look around for another way of finding out the answers to all my stupid questions. So, yeah, we'll see. But I mean, on a bigger picture, I am interested to see where sort of Project Ara, which is some of the code from Google's Project Ara, is used in this, and also where these mods, I know LG has a phone that you can sort of snap additions into and things. It's phone developers and phone manufacturers are sort of going down this interesting little fork in the road rather than just making black slabs. And like you said, I don't know how popular it's going to be, but one of them might come out that has everything that you want for a sort of modular phone. Just have to wait and see on it.
Let's change tack completely then and bring you potentially some bad news, and that's that Ryan Sipes is leaving Mycroft.
So Ryan Sipes, who we interviewed not very long ago on this podcast of ours, was very much the face of Mycroft, wasn't he? He was the CTO, but also the kind of PR man, the hype man for it. And so it does feel that him leaving is very bad news, as you said, Paddy. He has been replaced by, I don't want to be rude because we might talk to him, but what feels like a bit of a corporate drone. So I don't know. If you read between the lines of his blog post about why he left, he mentions open source and the fact that it's GPL and anyone could take that code and do whatever they want with it. Feels like it's got a bit too corporate for him. They don't really care too much about the open source side of things. They are not really. I mean, when we spoke to him, we talked about the replacement of the proprietary backend, and he said that they did want to do that, but it looks like that's just not going to happen, is it? And it's just gone all a bit too corporate, and so he's left to pursue pastures new.
Yeah, I heard him on another podcast shortly after his announcement, and there was no evidence that he had a plan of where that new pasture is. He sort of threw out a few ideas, but it doesn't sound like he's been poached or jumping ship particularly. Like I say, it's just been maybe run his course, or as you sort of alluded to there, the sort of free software side of it wasn't kind of aligned, let's say, with his views. But I am glad that you haven't said anything negative about the new guy at all, Joe. Corporate drone.
Well, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Just his blog post and everything seemed very corporate and very, I don't know. I don't want to say more negative things about him because he might be all right, and as I say, we might end up talking to him. But just the whole thing is starting to just reek of corporate and VC money and that kind of thing.
This sort of reminded me a little bit of the OwnCloud project when you were saying about him emphasizing the GPL and the fact that anyone can take the code and this and the other. It sounds very OwnCloud, Nextcloud, but I guess given that Microsoft is still in its infancy, it would be maybe a little bit premature to fork it. You might as well wait and see how it goes and then build off that, or maybe hasn't got a big enough team on his own. But who knows? Maybe we'll talk to this new guy and mend any bridges that we've burnt with him.
How many metaphors can you mix at once?
Yeah, I know you're pretty bad with that. But it's funny you bring up the OnCloud Nextcloud thing, because I've been hearing more and more about that and how that it might not be quite what it seems, and there may have been backroom deals going on, and there's a lot more politics there than it first seemed. And it could well be that the Microsoft situation, there's more politics here than it seems. So I wouldn't mind having a beer with Ryan and getting him to open up off the record about exactly what's going on there. And I get the feeling that we will hear more in due course, but it might be a little while before we hear that. So I suppose let's stop speculating and move on and talk about an excellent new endeavour by the Metropolitan Police Force here in London, where they're going to spend £2.1 million of my money, and well, our money, on Facebook and Twitter trolls and hunting them down, because they do need to be hunted down. People who say things like "get in the sea" are clearly making death threats, and they should be imprisoned indefinitely.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that to people who aren't aware of what's going on with that barking mad Labour politician.
Yeah, well, someone tweeted her to get in the sea, which is, I had never heard before, but is apparently a colloquialism for just sort of, it doesn't mean literally get in the sea. And she freaked out about it and said it was a death threat and stuff, which is just a bit ridiculous, isn't it? But I love the Register headline. London cops waste £2.1 million on thought crime unit. They never pull their punches, do they? The Register, when they're not doing ridiculous puns, that is, in the headlines. And the worst part about it is they're getting volunteers. So you're going to get real, the kind of person who's going to volunteer for this, don't you? To scour Twitter and Facebook and look for these people who've said things, and it's so terrible. I mean, even if you say idiotic things, racist things and homophobic things, shouldn't we have some sort of freedom of speech where you have the freedom to say ridiculous things like that, and I have the freedom to call you an idiot for doing so and move on? I just can't believe they're wasting all my money on this. And also the fact that people are going to be basically wrongfully imprisoned for it. And we're just moving more and more towards this Big Brother microchip in your wrist nightmare.
I agree with you entirely, particularly on the free speech issue. But let me just throw it back a second. Also this week, we had Anjem Choudhury banged up, who was a hate-preaching preacher, if you like, in this country. He was encouraging people to join Islamic State and commit atrocities and such like. Now, some people, and we're very few in number, would suggest that he has every right to make those sort of comments because that's free speech, but that's clearly not the majority view in the country.
But surely free speech gets to the point of when you ask someone to, when you're inciting violence and potentially promoting deaths of innocent people, and that's where the free speech stops becoming free speech, because people are acting upon what you're saying, and we know that people are acting upon it, with Daesh or IS or SIS, wherever we are this week. You have to draw the line somewhere. If someone just shouts racist abuse in your face, then that's not free speech. That's tantamount to borderline assault, because you should be able to get in with your day without someone shouting racist things or ageist or sexist, whatever it is, in your face. There's that line, and clearly he stepped across that line drawn by our government. Now, whether that line's in the right place for you or for everyone else, they've got to draw it somewhere, I think.
I'm not so sure, and I would question your allusion to having someone coming shouting in your face, because obviously the social media things which Joe was talking about, Twitter and Facebook, you actively have to go out and find these things, and if people try and interject themselves onto your timeline, you can quite happily block them and what have you. And in the case of Chowdhury, if he stood in a mosque somewhere in London preaching to people, and he might be inciting violence, you have to go and find him to hear that. It's not that he's got some sort of platform where he appears on all our telescreens every night.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Twitter feed type thing, because you can block people and ban people, and you get to choose what you listen to, which sometimes makes it a bit of an echo chamber. If we're not talking about people saying hurtful things, but you can produce an echo chamber by listening to what you want to listen to. So I agree that's different. I think we should have to disagree on this guy, because we've been the government have been trying to get him banged up for absolutely ages, not just for the things about IS, but even before that. And he's clearly just put his toe over the line one too many times, and they've jumped on him. However, I guess we're not a political podcast, so we'll get on to open source news, and this must be the happy end to the news, because these three ones are bright and airy. So first off is our good friends over at Microsoft, and a particular application called PowerShell. So this allows people to control servers and multiple instances, mostly on Azure for Microsoft, but it's been running on .NET, and where the .NET framework has now been released to run on Linux as well, they've moved PowerShell over as well. So you can now use PowerShell on Linux machines to control those machines as well. And they've open sourced it under the MIT license.
Well, let me give you a cynical sandwich on this one. So the first bit is any new code that's open source is good. The cynical bit in the middle of the sandwich is they are only doing this because it's in their financial interest to do so. And in the blog post about it, they talk about customers and how they are customer obsessed and stuff like that. So clearly they're not motivated by any altruistic feelings or anything. It's just about money. But then look at it this way. If making things open source is actually in your financial interests and you're a massive company, then surely that is good news generally for open source. It means that open source is a viable way to make money. And as part, I mean, they talk about it in the blog post how it's as part of a multiple platform environment that people live in. And it just goes to show that Linux and open source are very important. And if you look at it that way, it's not even a bad thing that they're doing it for financial reasons.
I think they've missed a huge trolling opportunity, though. As Jesse said, it's been released under the MIT license. Imagine if they put it out under the GPL.
That's true, actually. Yeah.
Well, so on the release, they had a little video that you could watch, Microsoft man to Microsoft man about it, and one of them was very yank and super excited. And a quote that I took out of it is, he said, "The great thing about the MIT license is that it's very permissive, so people can do all sorts of things with PowerShell. It's one of the best licenses." And I couldn't help but think, if it's so great, why isn't all your stuff released under this? They're being quite selective about what they're doing, and I just thought it was interesting. They're talking about how permissive it is, and the discussions we've had about the GPL and how it has certain areas which aren't so permissive, and they do lock you down. But I would just sort of, going back to your sandwich, Joe. I mean, I think you're trying really hard to not like Microsoft, and my argument would be that
I don't have to try very hard.
Yeah, but you're trying very hard to make this into it's only Microsoft doing their thing. Of course they're making money. Like, show me a company that isn't trying to make money. Look at Red Hat and Canonical, held up as bastions of open source. If someone told them that everything they ever did now is worth, every instance of Ubuntu is worth £100, they'd be laughing. And they're trying to make money. So you can't really hold that as a as a negative to Microsoft. And maybe as they go through their various applications and software, and they realize that these are better released as open source, and they are better for their customers to be able to use them on Linux and multiple OSs and things, it will slowly but surely inform the conversation that they have around board meeting tables and stuff as to what they should be doing in the future. I'm not saying that tomorrow they're going to open source, Word and Excel, but it takes a lot of time and examples for a company as big as Microsoft to change their way of thinking. And maybe this is the very thin end of what might not be a wedge, but if I can't put a metaphor in, then I can't finish the sentence.
Yeah, and before anyone gets in touch, we're obviously aware there is more than one GPL license, and we just tend to say the GPL as shorthand. So please don't write in saying, there's a difference between GPL v2 and GPL v3. Anyway, let's move it on.
Way to alienate the audience, Paddy.
Well, I do my best. Other positive FOSS news then, moving all the way over to Lithuania, is that the police over there have rolled out LibreOffice onto about 8,000 workstations, and they're also investigating running Ubuntu on the desktops, and that's obviously a little bit further down the line, but as usual, it looks like a thing where you put an application, get people used to the applications, and then you can change the underlying operating system after the event, and it looks like a positive thing to me.
Yeah, it looks very positive to me. And I think they are actually trialing a few Ubuntu machines at the moment, a very limited trial, but that's you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? And yeah, as we always say, applications first and then change out the underlying operating system, and people probably won't even notice. So yeah, well done the Lithuanians, and hopefully this continues to spread throughout Europe and the world. And speaking of the world, the last one to end on is that the Indian government is deploying OwnCloud for everyone's DigiLocker, which is essentially a government-funded initiative where every citizen has the right to have a bit of space on government servers to store important documents like birth certificates and that kind of thing. And so that everyone has got access to somewhere to store files online, and they use an OwnCloud rather than some dodgy proprietary solution. So it's got to be good news for everyone, really, hasn't it? Because hopefully, if there are bugs in OwnCloud, and I can't imagine there are any, so maybe they might find them and maybe even spend some money fixing them, and then everyone will benefit. So well done, Lithuania, and well done, India.
Well, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Joe's been experimenting with some other operating systems on one of his Chromebooks, and I gather you've been having some success.
One of my Chromebooks. I haven't got more than one. Yeah, I've only got a C720, and it was running Linux Mint, but I decided that it was time for a change. And so I discovered GalliumOS, which is based on Xubuntu 16.04. The previous version was based on Xubuntu 15.10, so I didn't really want to bother with that. And it is a very nice distro. There's not a massive amount to say about it because it's basically Xubuntu that looks a little bit nicer and has full hardware support, because even though it's been around for a long time, this C720, the touchpad support in sort of mainline Linux is a bit ropey, to be honest. It works a bit, but you get all sorts of issues. So you do kind of need to have a specialist distro. And I had been getting distros from DistroShare before, but that has just disappeared from the internet. I don't know what happened to it. So even if I wanted to reinstall the Linux Mint image that I had, I couldn't do that. So yeah, GalliumOS.org anyway. It's a fairly intuitive website, but trying to download this thing is a bit confusing because there are several different Chromebooks that this supports, and they're based on Haswell, Broadwell, Bay Trail, Sandy Bridge, and Ivy Bridge processors, and you have to download the specific image for your Chromebook, which...
Yeah, sorry if I just interrupt you there. I haven't been lazy this fortnight. I just don't have an x86 Chromebook. So Joe was the only one who could look at this.
Yeah, ARM devices are not supported. So when I read that, I thought, all right, yeah, so it's just down to me as Paddy doesn't have a Chromebook and yours is ARM-based. which is not a huge surprise because supporting ARM is a little bit harder, whereas this is basically just putting in a kernel module to make the touchpad work and then prettying it up a bit, I think. Maybe that's doing them a disservice for all the work they've done, but well, there you go. So you have to go to the hardware compatibility page, which is very straightforward, very clear, and you just look down the list for your one minus C720, go across, okay, that's Haswell, download that, and then you boot it up to just, it's pretty much like Ubuntu, except that it's all laid out more or less exactly how I want it to be, with a panel at the bottom, Numix icons, which I know you despise, Paddy, but I actually quite like. I can never be bothered to install them and go through that hassle, but it's nice to have them pre-installed. It looks nice and modern. I'm not sure about this sort of slight fade when you do minimizing and maximizing. And there's not a lot in terms of software pre-installed. There's no LibreOffice and GIMP and stuff like that. But you've got Chromium as the default browser, which I think is a very sensible choice these days. I think Firefox is a bit dead in the water, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who will write in and say, no, it's not. I use it every day, and I use it every day. But most people use Chrome, and you can't bundle that with an open source operating system unless you just don't care about licensing and stuff. So Chromium is quite a sensible choice. I think it's a good compromise. And because it's based on Ubuntu, you've got the Ubiquity installer, which I can't say enough good things about. It's just so easy. And so to get it running, it's all just really easy. And suddenly you've got a Chromebook that works basically perfectly. And in fact, I ended up using this installation at Talk Live to run the projector and the music. So it did its job fairly well there. So very few complaints, I would say.
I'm sorry for suggesting you've got more than one Chromebook. It's just an assumption because you've got so many bits of hardware clustering your place up. But as you said, I haven't. I understand Chromebooks are missing certain keys. Does that pose any difficulty if you're actually trying to run an ordinary desktop?
Well, it posed problems at Talk Live because there's no F11, there's no F keys, so I couldn't F11 the images for the backdrop behind us. So I had to go into the sort of file or view or whatever full screen with the mouse, which was a bit annoying. But instead of F keys, it has a load of media keys, which are fully supported here. I don't know if you just use a normal distro, whether they're supported. But yeah, it can be. There's no delete key either. There's a combination. Jesse, please tell me you can remember. What is the combination? It's like Alt and Shift or something.
Alt backspace.
Yeah, that's it. That gives you delete, which I can never remember. So I always have to use the arrow keys and backspace to do it. But yeah, there's little annoyances like that. But otherwise, you can pick up one of these C720s really, really cheaply these days. I mean, I think I paid about 80 quid or something for mine. It wasn't in great aesthetic condition, but it works well and the battery lasts ages. And so if you're looking for a cheap Linux laptop, I mean, it's only got 2 gigs of RAM. It's soldered. You can never put in more than that. So it's never going to do any hardcore stuff for you. But for day-to-day browsing, it's pretty much perfect. I've got a couple of tiny niggles with it. The main one is the touchpad. For some reason, they have disabled the physical right click. And so to right click, I think it's 2 fingers, touch, which you can get used to, but I just like having a physical right click. And it does have 2 physical buttons as part of the touchpad. So why they've made that choice, I don't know. And I couldn't find a simple way in the GUI to change that. I'm sure there's a config file somewhere that I can change and reboot and it would work. And in fact, rather than having me Google it, LazyWeb, someone tell me, how do I get my right click back? Paddy, you probably know.
I don't, I'm sorry, no.
Okay, well, if you're listening and you know how to do it, let me know, tweet me or something, or send us an email, show@linuxluddites.com. But otherwise, it's staying on there is the bottom line, and that's the best endorsement you can get, really, because I needed a distro that I was confident in its security and that kind of thing, and I like Ubuntu, but it didn't have the touchpad support when I tried standard Ubuntu. So GalliumOS is going to do the job. One interesting thing that I actually learned something from is if you go to GalliumOS update, it just opens a terminal and then runs apt-get update and dist upgrade, but it uses the QQ flag. Now that doesn't mean crime or noob, I learnt. It means quiet, so you just don't see anything happen, and then it just magically sort of does it without you seeing it. So that's what I learned from it. I mean, I would just open a terminal and do it properly anyway, but it seems like a very no-nonsense, why bother writing something when you can just open a terminal and do it way of doing things. So yeah, all in all, I'm very impressed with it. That one little problem with the right click, which I'm sure I can fix, aside, I'm very impressed, and I'm going to keep using it.
So do you know anything about the guys behind this? I say guys plural, I assume there's more than one person, and why they actually developed it in the first place?
Well, not really. All I know is that it touts itself as a fast and lightweight Linux distro for ChromeOS devices. So I didn't actually look into who's behind it or anything. I know it supports a lot more Chromebooks than my C720. If you look on the hardware compatibility list, you've got all sorts of Chromebooks and Chromeboxes with various levels of support, and whether there's any issues or anything. And so if you've got a Chromebook and you are looking to run a proper OS on it, then I think this is a very good place to start. On to the feedback then. And first of all, a huge, huge thanks to Lars Folk-Petersen, who realized that his credit card had changed and PayPal had basically stopped charging him the small amount each month. So it gave us basically more than he'd missed over the last few months, and then made sure that it was recurring again. So very much appreciated, Lars. And of course, to the other existing monthly supporters, it really helps us keep things going. And because we've got that small amount from each of you coming in each month, we know exactly where we are. We know how much we can spend on servers and hardware and that kind of thing. So yeah, thank you very much, guys. And so contact details in that strange font that persists. You can email us at show@linuxluddites.com, or if you go to the website, you'll find links to the Twitter, which is @linuxluddites, or the Google Plus and Facebook communities. And of course, you can always leave a comment on the website.
Yeah, and some people who did just that were talking about Thunderbird and other email clients, so we'll kick off with those. And Will said, Jesse's comments on Thunderbird seemed un-Luddite to me. Email is pretty well established, so I'm not sure Thunderbird needs a lot of new features or updates beyond security updates. I think Jesse should have stuck to having a declining user base as his definition of not doing well, rather than calling it dead or questioning whether developers can maintain it. I have some doubts as well, but they've done well so far. I'm sure fewer and fewer people use a desktop email client, so that's probably the primary motivation for Mozilla not wanting to support it anymore.
Well, that seems logical to me, doesn't it? If not many people are using it, and most people, I don't know, is it fair to say most people have switched to webmail? It certainly feels that way, and if that is true, then why would they bother supporting something that not many people are using?
I think in fairness, something like Clause is also pretty well developed now. I mean, there was a time when Thunderbird was far richer feature-wise, but Clause has certainly caught up, I think.
Yeah, I have no problem using Clause when I do need it. I can't remember the last time I fired it up, but it was working well enough for me.
You say when you need it. Why would you need it rather than just see, your Gmail online and things like this?
I don't know how much I should go into this, but it's easier to just alias certain email addresses to your Gmail account. And then if you actually want to reply from that, not mess around with certificates. It's a long story, but occasionally I want to send emails from addresses on my server that I haven't configured in Gmail, put it that way.
Ah, the smoke and mirror world of Joe Ressington.
Let's move it along very rapidly then. And Ian Barton got in touch in response to Will's comment and said, I used to like Thunderbird a lot. However, over the years, it developed bloat and turned into a real bandwidth hog. Some features designed to make it easier to use really got in the way. For example, if you run your own mail server and just want to enter all the information by hand, the current incarnation of Thunderbird makes this almost impossible. I've now used Mutt for years, but it's not really designed for non-geeks.
That thing you was talking about setting up your own server, that's why you advised me to use Clause in the first place, Paddy, isn't it?
I think it was, yeah.
And that's clause as in a bear's clause rather than a clause of a sentence.
Yeah, and this final sentence about Mutt not being designed for non-geeks, just to clarify, Mutt is a terminal-based email client, so that's definitely aimed at geeks. I just feel that's a bit of an understatement.
Yeah, I think, not really designed for non-geeks is an understatement, yeah. So Cubicle Nate also chipped in with, I can't speak for Thunderbird, but Kmail is still being actively updated. Though, admittedly, the Economy transition was rough. Subsequent improvements, however, have meant that it now works really well. I'm also a big fan of the KDE PIM, so the integration of Kmail into Contact made it kind of an automatic win for me. Now, I'm afraid that was all just moonspeak to me, being that I don't use KDE at all and don't like it. But it sounds like email is covered pretty well on that side of things, so that's good. And Cubicle Nate continues, a side note, as a user of the Google ecosystem for personal and work-related functions, it's my opinion that the way mail is managed in Gmail is not ideal, and I think it's unfortunate that so many people have moved away from the desktop email client as there's so much more functionality to be had in a client. I suppose that's in reference to the conversations and stuff, maybe, which I like and you don't, Paddy.
I loathe it if we're talking about threading of emails.
You have it set so it's all just individual emails, like old school style, don't you?
I do indeed. I really dislike the fact that on the phone you can't do that. On Android, it doesn't let you have an individual view, and it insists that things are lumped into conversations, which, it drives me scatty, to be honest.
What annoys me is that you can only have 100 emails in one conversation, and then it starts a new one.
Yeah, I've had that same problem with a bunch of mates when we're trying to organise, holidays and bits and bobs. You're often all hammering backwards and forwards on the emails, and it gets to 100, and it auto kicks. And then once you think, oh yeah, someone suggested whatever holiday destination, I'll search for it. It's really difficult to search through the 100 emails. And I thought that given it's Google, that search would be, easy and an absolute breeze, but it just seems to be a right pain. And so there's some weird thing where you have to open all 100 and then do just a control F on the page to search through them. It seems kind of backwards. But just taking Cubicle Nate's last point there about functionality and the fact that you get more functionality in email clients and things like this, and Ian Barton also touched on it to do with the amount of bloat, as he put it, in Thunderbird. So Rob Landley takes up that point and says, I stopped using Kmail because of the bundling. It used to be a standalone program. Then it was bundled in with half a dozen other programs, newsreaders, RSS feeds, and other stuff in some weird tabbed interface. And finally, when I switched from KDE to Xfce, oops, it was bundled into the whole desktop. I don't quite get that last bit. Can someone make sense of it for me?
Yeah, I think what Rob's suggesting is that when you install it, it pulls down near as damn it the whole desktop as dependency, which it does.
Oh, this is the classic, you install one KDE thing, you get the whole of KDE. Yeah, okay. So he finishes off saying, it wasn't just that installing it installed 24 packages and launching it launched a bunch of daemons, but you had to install and launch KDE's configurator to change font sizes or switch the web browser association for email links because it was stored in KDE desktop settings. Pity, it was a nice email client, but it wasn't worth the baggage. So I think there's sort of a balance to be had, isn't there, as to whether you have an email client and it's got all this functionality and it's great, and then other people want just the bare bones and something slick. And so maybe after all that mutt is the way forward.
So let's move on to a little bit of feedback about our FOSS Talk appearance. And MAR on the website said, I think the question about open source versus closed in firmware was framed backwards. It's not about empowerment, but disempowerment. That is, closed source is used to take power, control, and choice away from people. The question we should be insisting on from companies and programmers is, what justifies my vulnerability to your competence and interests? What are you trying to hide? What ethical decisions are you making on my behalf? In a time where USB controller firmware can be used to permanently own your computer, anything hidden by complex organisations with economic and political interests must be suspected.
I thought we'd get this one in here to booster Joe's tinfoil hat.
Well, I don't know. It's funny that you say that. I mean, I'm thinking that, well, it's sort of a good point, but at the same time, are you really important enough for them to want to do that? And I don't think I am, to be honest. I don't think I am important enough for anyone to really care. If you're an Edward Snowden or, if you're involved with WikiLeaks or something like that, that's when you should be worried. But the average person, and I know this is not a good attitude to have, and it's potentially a bit naive, but you're just not important enough for them to care, I'm afraid.
I guess the argument against that is always, but at what point do you become important enough? Edward Snowden didn't go to his day job planning to release everything until a certain point at which he realized that this had to be seen by the world, and he, went around pulling the information and leaking it. But up until that point, he didn't know that he was about to be looked for.
Well, Magnus said, "You've discussed the issue of FOSS licenses and control of your computing several times. In most discussions, and this is true of your latest one in number 84 as well, you address only the first layer. With this, I mean, you ask questions like, would you exercise an increased control? I feel that by limiting the discussion to one layer, you miss one extremely important part of what needs to be discussed. To get to that part, you instead need to ask the following question. How would you benefit from everyone having more control? With that question, we get to the heart of FOSS. But that implies that I would care about anyone else. And for me, it's all about being self-centered and I'm all right, Jack, and that kind of attitude.
See, when I read this the first time, I thought, oh yeah, we were talking about what I would do, what you and I would do with that control, and the idea of then putting that to everyone and how the masses would use that. But when I read it the first time, I was thinking that was clever, and now that I've read it again, I can't work out what's the difference. Surely everyone on an individual scale just multiplied up is everybody on a mass scale. So if you and I have control, everyone has that control. So is it? I can't see how it's that much of a different question now.
A Thatcherite view from Jesse, uncharacteristic.
It's false class consciousness, that's what it is.
No, it kind of makes sense though, doesn't it? That if FOSS benefits me, well, it's like going back to the news with the Indian government using OwnCloud, and if they improve it for themselves, then everyone will benefit. So I think you might be right, Jesse, all jokes aside.
Well, let's wrap up the feedback on a positive note, and Gavin got in touch and said, I've just listened to episode 84 and felt compelled to let you know that not all libraries are dying. In fact, some are actively engaging new audiences with STEM activities, and for those who aren't aware, that's science, technology,
engineering and math.
Thank you, gentlemen. That include the use of FOSS. I have to say STEM isn't a term we tend to use in the UK too much. It's one of those Atlantic things, but anyway.
I think it's a term that was born in the UK.
Really?
We use it at work all the time. Yeah, we have STEM events, and the E from STEM is what we all get involved with. It's it's used a lot. Maybe it's an industry more than schools almost.
No, I think it's just the corruption of language that's occurring. I mean, my daughter asked to put a suitcase in the boot of the car earlier, and she called it the trunk. So she got chastised for that. So
I was going to say, no TV for a week.
But was she pointing at the suitcase at the time? Because that could be correct.
Was she off to boarding school with the trunk?
No, she was off on holiday. But anyway, sorry, I'll get back to Gavin's mail. For example, earlier this year, I ran 4 public code club sessions at the Crawley Library STEM in the Stacks event. Many of those taking part asked me where they could buy the Scratch software they'd just used to write their first program in. Needless to say, they were pleased with the answer I gave them.
Clearly echoing back our discussion on the last show about how there aren't that many libraries that are doing well as far as we were concerned. But it looks like certainly down in Crawley they're doing a lot of interesting stuff. And I watched the video on his page that he linked to, and showing not just sort of programming for kids and things, but also some sort of hardware hacking, and also there's a Frankenstein game, and that was all using Raspberry Pis and bits and bobs. So it was a range of different things, both technology and non. And maybe it's a case of these things going on that we just don't hear about.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those cases where we were wrong about something, and it's actually a good thing. So thanks for telling us about that, Kevin. It's good to hear that there are some positive things happening in libraries. But that'll do it for the feedback then. Let's move on. A couple of weeks ago, Paddy suggested that we should have a look at the Lumina desktop environment. And so what is Lumina Desktop? Well, it's produced by the FreeBSD and the TrueOS people that used to be called PCBSD. And it's a lightweight desktop environment that is built with Qt. And although I suppose primarily aimed at the BSDs, it does work perfectly well on Linux and other Unix type operating systems. And it is lightweight, but I'm afraid, Paddy, it's pretty horrible. I didn't like it at all. And from what Jesse's told me, I think he agrees. So I somehow get the feeling you quite liked it. So please defend your decision for us to talk about this.
I'm feeling picked on here. I thought it was interesting. They've been working on it a while, and last time I looked at it, it was absolutely hideous, I have to admit. And so I followed the instructions on their website to install it, and I installed Ubuntu 15.10 just to try it out because they suggested it was available easily from a repository by doing so. And it still looked pretty horrible and pretty non-functional. And then I looked at the about settings, and it was on 0.8.7.
Yeah, I did exactly that because I was expecting this 1.0 release, and I was like, okay, right, well, Arch-based distro it is, and I'm not doing proper Arch, so Manjaro, and that was very, very easy to install it, wasn't it?
It was. I went down exactly the same route, and I must admit I dipped back into 15.10 last night just to see whether it had been updated, and it's still set on 0.8.7. So unfortunately, the documentation online for that is incorrect, which I think is a shame. Sorry, just to diverge slightly from the route the conversation was going, because one of the things about this, coming from a BSD heritage, and you can see that BSD heritage, is the documentation, which I thought is absolutely fantastic online. It's very clear, the user manual. It documents all the settings and anything you could really ask about it. So I think that's a real plus here. You look at some of the other desktops we have in Linux land, and the documentation is woeful.
I would question the need for documentation for a desktop environment. Surely it should just work logically and intuitively, and you should never have to look at the documentation.
I guess what you're getting at is if it behaves like Windows used to behave, then it should be fine.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, even Unity, like it or loathe it, it is fairly intuitive.
I don't think that's the case, to be honest. I mean, as I said, I went down the 15.10 route and I installed bog standard 15.10, which came with a Unity desktop, and I've forgotten how bloody awful it is, to be frank. Before I tried to install Lumina on top of it, it isn't intuitive, and trying to find things isn't very straightforward. It wasn't for me anyway. But that's a rat hole. I'm going down totally there. I thought the documentation was good. You may disagree about the need for it, but if you're a new user and you want to know how to do things, it's there. And I would suggest you do actually need it because it isn't awfully logically laid out. Some of the interface settings, menus and what have you aren't quite how I think they ought to be. And that's what I'll come back to in my conclusion, if you like. But let's drag it back to what you asked me originally.
Yeah, defend yourself. Defend why we're even talking about this when I think it's rubbish and not even worth talking about. This 1.0 is more like a 0.1 to me.
No, I think that's grossly unfair. I mean, we talk about OwnCloud in those terms, or we have done in the past several occasions. This is a functional desktop now. I mean, last time I looked at it, it wasn't a functional desktop. Now it is. I had a couple of bugs I came across whilst using it, but not particularly drastically. I believe you did from a screenshot you sent as well. And it works. And I mean, just to pitch it for the listener, I guess it sits somewhere between LXDE and Xfce. It hasn't got any of the fancy things that you expect with modern desktops and perhaps with Xfce. So for instance, if you're trying to put application shortcuts on your taskbar, you can't just drag and drop them. You have to do it differently. So in that way, it's a bit more like LXDE where you have to manually set things up. But it has got graphical tools for changing all your things like fonts and icons used and all the usual sort of thing. So it's kind of a halfway house between those two. And you mentioned, Joe, it sells itself as a lightweight desktop. And that's reasonably true. I mean, I found it to be about 20 megabytes or so heavier than bog standard Xfce. And again, that was running on top of Manjaro as you were.
But one thing that I read in the documentation on the Lumina website was that it's very customizable, and therefore distribution maintainers can customize it how they like. And so I'm wondering to what extent I'm criticizing Manjaro's choice of default, and to what extent that is just the default that comes out of the box if you don't mess with it. So am I being unnecessarily cruel to it when it could be set up to be better than it is here?
Yeah, one of the nice things about this is that all your settings are held centrally. I mean, you can have individual user settings as well, but out of the box, it ships with this thing, the luminadesktop.conf file, which is in your etc directory. And all the settings are in one place. It's a nice text file, so you can actually look at that and edit things manually quite happily yourself. So as a distro maintainer, you can get things set up exactly as you want. I mean, one of my major criticisms of this is major criticisms of how the BSDs present themselves generally anyway, which is graphically and from a user interface point of view. I don't think it's not as much thought goes into it. It's just that they don't know what the hell they're doing by way of giving someone a nice looking experience. I mean, this is a functional desktop, but it looks like a fairly ropey version of KDE 3, if you like, with very bad icon set choice and controls in strange places on some of the interface elements and things like that. And you could see if someone with a bit of UI knowledge got involved in the project, it could actually look fairly slick indeed.
Even down to, and again, I don't know if this is Manjaro or if this is default, the panel at the bottom, you can adjust the width of that by percent of the width of the screen, and it's set to be 99%. And in the earlier versions, it was set less than that. But why would you want it to be 99%? So when you drag your mouse into the corner, you don't quite hit the menu button. You have to come slightly further to the right. Just little decisions like that. Just, it's as if they didn't bother to test it.
Let me ask that for you, Joe. So I was reminded an awful lot of Fluxbox when using this, and I suspect it's based on Fluxbox or one of the boxes, because that menu that we've been talking about just there is like is it the slat menu, the slit menu, something like that from Fluxbox, and you can choose how wide it is as a percentage of the screen. And the thing that really reminded me of Fluxbox was the right click for a context menu. So anywhere on the desktop, you can right click and you can have not the same as the main start menu, but you can select whether you want to launch applications. I think there's like a find and some other bits and bobs. So it's the standard sort of open box, Fluxbox type right click menu. And whereas in Fluxbox, that's the only menu you have, in Lumina, they've put a standard sort of start menu which you can search. Now, if you are used to using that right-click menu for your day-to-day activities, and you fill your desktop with windows, you can't get to the desktop to right-click on it. If you go down to the furthest corner, you are guaranteed some air, some dead space for you to right-click on, and that is why the taskbar is at 99%.
Aha, fair enough. And it is using Fluxbox as a window manager, isn't it, Paddy?
It is, yeah. They intend to rewrite that bit of the code base, so actually going to be writing their own window manager that's going to be fully integrated. They're also using things like NumLockX and X Screensaver at the moment, and again, they're wanting to toss all that away and have one single program, one single package, if you like, that does the whole shooting match for you.
So good eye, Jesse, but also you should have read some more about this rather than just installing it and trying it.
I was just taking a note out of your book of not reading any documentation.
Fair enough. But one thing I read in the documentation was that unlike most Linux desktop environments, this really doesn't have many dependencies, does it? Linux ones tend to rely on dbus and all kinds of stuff like that, whereas this is just totally independent of all that.
Yeah, I guess that's quite refreshing, to be honest. It's nice to see not too much tying together of things. My understanding, though, is when they actually do write their own window manager as a component of this, they're going to put in some of those dependencies back again. But as we're looking at it today, yes, it is pretty much standalone. So if we ignore any complaints about aesthetics, I mean, from a practical point of view, did it have all the features you expected? I mean, I compared it earlier to sort of a halfway house between LXDE and Xfce, and I can see that most of the functionality from both of those are in there. I mean, how do you feel about it?
So we get often criticised for making a remark about the default desktop image. So I was going to avoid that, and I thought, let's not mention this. I'll change it to something that I do want to see. And this is a fundamental part of any desktop that, sort of that has a modern interface, and it has little GUIs for doing stuff. So right click on the desktop, not even in maybe I didn't right click on the desktop. Maybe I did. Somewhere in there is a settings menu. Rather than choosing straight away to change the desktop, you have to go to some settings, find, view settings or desktop settings, whatever it might be. And rather than showing a whole load of images, it just had the one that was on the desktop. I thought, maybe they just don't load it with multiple images. Oh, but what's this? A list of things that look like they are the names of images, Lumina red desktop, Lumina blue desktop, Lumina grey, whatever it might be. But when you click on them and load them, it does then show a little a thumbnail for you to see what it would look like, and it keeps the previous one. So you have to go through and manually click on all of these different images to then get all the different thumbnails, to then pick which one you like the look of, rather than just having them all preloaded. I'm thinking of Linux Mint, for example. When you choose that desktop image, it shows you all the pretty pictures that Mint have chosen, and then you can load your own ones as well. And this just seemed like an odd thing, something that is so clearly visual. What does this picture look like? And it's not been very well handled.
Well, I've just tried to change the desktop background to solid black as I like it, and it's just not worked. So that's not very good, is it? It's just stuck with this rather interesting 90s looking default background. And can I talk about one feature that is massively lacking? I was going to say that it's got poor multi-screen support, but it just doesn't have any multiple screen support at all. Even though, strangely, if you look in the screenshots section of the website, there is one that shows 3 monitors being used. So I don't really understand how they managed to get that working unless they're all exactly the same resolution. Because I thought it would be nice to be able to look at this while we're talking about it. And so I installed it on my Gigabyte Bricks, my little projector machine, which is more or less silent, I hope. Well, we'll find out when I edit this. But the problem with that is that the primary monitor, it sort of, most distros think it's a laptop because it's got this projector, which is a very low resolution screen. But you plug in an HDMI monitor, and then that can become your main default screen if you set it that way in most desktop environments and distros. Whereas with this, there is just no option to do that. And so although it displays it at full resolution, the panel is where it would be on the lower resolution screen. And so you've got this floating panel basically in the middle of my monitor here that's tiny and basically useless. And I've got one that's sort of towards the left-hand side at the top. And so, yes, I could go in and try and change that stuff with editing the config file. But for me, it's just poor. There's nowhere I can find in the settings or anything to change that. And so I'm stuck. And when you click the menu as well, you have to manually drag down, I'm going to do it now, to get the preferences and leave and, the things that you actually need. So for me, if you're going to run it on any sort of multi-monitor setup, forget about it for now until they develop this further.
Yeah, I mean, I right-clicked to load the terminal, and it wouldn't load, and I tried it again, it wouldn't load off of the right-click context menu. But then when you go to the, what's the word for a start menu that isn't Microsoft?
Start menu, let's just call it that.
Okay. So when you go to the start menu, then you can load it from there. So I don't know why one was and one wasn't, bit confusing. They have widgets. So when you load up at the start, the first time you boot into it, it has a little RSS widget, and it does tell you like news from Lumina. And in the news for the most recent one is that they've released 1.0.0. So that was all good. I didn't really want it, so sort of got rid of it, but did see what other widgets they had. And one of them is a music widget, which I thought was very useful, apart from the fact that it was in absolute micro size. Like, you couldn't even see what was a start and a stop button. They were just two little tiny black, like almost 2 or 3 pixels wide. And it wasn't until I just started wildly clicking and found one was like load songs or something. So I downloaded some songs onto it and started playing them. It's quite a nice little thing to use if you could actually see what you were clicking on. So widgets they've implemented, but not so well. I mean, some of the other ones were perfectly fine. I think there was maybe a news widget and something else, but some work to be done there. Oh, and I installed it on a laptop. I guess we're just sort of, it's a free-for-all now. It's just a free-for-all. I installed it on a laptop, and the battery indicator was at 0%, which, if I'm correct, means that the laptop shouldn't have been on.
Yeah, on my Gigabyte Bricks, I've got 2 battery indicators. One of them is mostly full, even though this thing doesn't have a battery. And the other one's empty. It says 0% remaining. So, yeah, that's not very good either, is it?
Well, that's probably betraying its BSD heritage there and isn't fully integrated with all the Linux power management.
I suppose so.
I don't know. I feel you guys are being a little hard on this. I mean, it clearly isn't polished. Functionally, though, I found it to be reasonably reliable. The only issue I had was with the actual file manager, which occasionally crashed on me.
Yeah, which is, that's a minor thing, isn't it, when your file manager crashes? I don't know. I feel like you're trying to defend the indefensible, and I don't want to be too negative, especially towards the end of the show. But,
yes, it's too late for that, Joe, already.
Yeah. Oh, well, there were some positive things in the news, to be fair, especially towards the end, but I just can't see any redeeming features. I just can't see in a world where Xfce, LXDE, Budgie, all of these desktops exist, why anyone would bother with this.
That, I guess, is the question, and that's the question that stayed with me. I mean, my 2 issues with this were the aesthetics. There's a couple of little bugs, I say, and even things like the file manager have some good features. I mean, for instance, it's got ZFS support built in, so ZFS is obviously popular on BSDs, and the fact that file manager actually supports it, unlike a lot of Linux file managers, I think is a good thing. But the aesthetics are a little bit off at the moment, and they could certainly be improved. But the question is, why would you want to use it when, as you suggest, there are other options out there? It's no lighter than the other options out there, and it's less polished than the other options out there. Now, I appreciate it's a 1.0, but if you're going to be producing something that's fundamentally in the same paradigm as an XD or an Xfce, why?
Well, yeah, exactly. I installed LXDE as well on this same Manjaro, and that worked perfectly with the multiple monitors. And there was a setting there to basically turn off the projector one, and I had a perfectly usable desktop computer that was incredibly fast and worked brilliantly. I just don't see the need for it. I mean, I suppose the only thing you could say is that it is much more portable right now because it doesn't have all these dependencies. But if they're going to introduce those anyway, then it's just going to be yet another sort of standard panel on the bottom desktop environment.
Then again, we could actually turn your own question around against yourself because you mentioned things like Budgie there. I mean, what is the possible justification for Ike going out and building Budgie?
Well, I asked myself that question, and I think the answer is to use most of GNOME without actually using full-on GNOME and without just forking things and stuff. So I don't know. I have asked myself that question, why Ike hasn't used something like Xfce or Mate, but I'm sure he has his reasons. But that doesn't, 2 wrongs don't make a right. If what he has done there is a waste of effort, then so is Lumina, as far as I'm concerned. And I feel really bad saying that because clearly people have worked hard on this and someone must like it. But the question is, what itch is this scratching for them, the people who have made this? Why aren't they using something like LXDE or LXQt? Because let's face it, that's what it's most similar to.
Is it potentially, from the BSD point of view, it's a BSD-centric desktop environment? Whereas if you're on BSD and you're running Xfce or LXDE, there's a sour taste because that's basically a Linux desktop environment and it's been ported over or it's been made to work. Whereas this is BSD first. Is there some sort of pride in that? I'm assuming that Xfce and all those are available on BSD.
Well, certainly Mate is, and my understanding is that, yeah, they are all available. I mean, it's free software, and it's not, BSD is not sufficiently different to make it impossible to run them. And I have seen, well, definitely Mate with GhostBSD, but I suppose what you're getting at, Jesse, is the not invented here syndrome.
Yeah, if you name any major desktop environment, it'll be a Linux desktop environment, and maybe there's just a case of wanting to, there's certain pride perhaps in using BSD and being different from Linux. So the last thing that you want is another Linux desktop environment, and that just means that that's the one niche that hasn't been scratched, as you said.
Well, as we know, BSD is licensed far more permissively than most Linux stuff. And so maybe that is cutting to the heart of this, because Lumina is licensed under a 3-clause BSD license, meaning that it is much freer than most of the other ones that we've been talking about that are generally GPL something, 2 or 3. So could it be that they wanted to have a truly free desktop? Troll.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a fairly reasonable sort of point to make there. And if that is the fundamental reason as to why this is another desktop environment, it's clearly going to stay around, because that's not just a wish to have something else for the sake of it. That's a wish to have a desktop environment for licensing reasons. So maybe at 1.5 or 2.0, it'll be a lot more functional, and can stand shoulder to shoulder with LXD and Xfce and things.
Yeah, and I'll certainly be keeping an eye on it, because aesthetics aside, I think functionally a lot of it is there. It's not fully there yet, but a lot of it is there. And as you said earlier, Joe, it hasn't got a lot of cruft attached to it either. I mean, the integration with things like console kit and dbus and systemd and what have you isn't there. And although they say they're going to put a little bit of integration at the back end in future releases, if it doesn't go down the same path as a lot of the Linux desktops, I'll be very happy bunny indeed.
Well, hopefully this can be the show where Paddy tries all the latest Lumina desktop so we don't have to. So do keep us up to date on that, Paddy, and I'll try it when it's a bit better. But with that, we're coming to the end of another Linux Luddites. You can email us at show@linuxluddites.com, or find us on Twitter at Linux Luddites, or the Google Plus and Facebook communities, or leave a comment on the website. Thanks for joining me, Paddy and Jesse, and thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you again in 2 weeks with more Linux news, reviews, comment, and generally being grumpy.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, Illuminati.
Confirmed. See you later. That was a terrible, terrible pun, Jesse. You should feel bad.
I don't feel bad.
Is it being redone, or shall I stop my recording?
No, that's it. That's fine.